The European Union is meeting this week to discuss financial aid for Ukraine. About $54 billion is on the table, but one country among the 27-nation bloc seems to be apprehensive. Hungary says it is wrong for money in the EU budget to go outside the bloc. Now, to discuss this further, we are being joined by Surgej Sumlenny from Berlin. He is a defense expert and the director of European Resilience Initiative Center. Mr. Sumlenny, thank you so much for joining us here on WION.
Thank you for having invited me today.
All right. Now, Hungary has been the weakest link in the West's response to Ukraine. Do you think the reason for this is Budapest's close ties with Moscow?
Yes, absolutely. It is obvious that many actions by the government of Viktor Orban are clearly in interest of Moscow. And we know that the Hungarian foreign minister has visited Moscow regularly within the last months. He's actually the only foreign minister of any EU member who did it several times. And this is suspicious. We also know that Hungary has clear claims on land in Ukraine, on so-called Transcarpathian region. The dreams of Greater Hungary are a part of Viktor Orban's political agenda. And Viktor Orban clearly wanted to profit from the Russian-Ukrainian war, hoping that he can at least increase his influence in these regions.
Right. Mr. Sumlenny, just minutes back, actually, we were hearing from Viktor Orban's advisor that Hungary might be ready to make a compromise this week. But to keep something like this till the last minute, do you think Hungary is testing the tit-for-tat method, given that EU has suspended a large chunk of funds for the country over what the bloc claims as damaged democratic checks and balances?
Absolutely. That is what Viktor Orban is doing. He's not only planning to hand Moscow, what is obvious because of his ties, which I've already described a bit, but of course he is aiming on his own interest, and his own interest is to get as much profit as possible out of the Hungarian membership in the EU and in the NATO. And this profit means he knows he can veto any decision of the EU and of the NATO. And he wants to be paid for that. He wants to increase his political influence within the country. He wants to rule his country with quasi-dictatorship means, or at least authoritarian means. And he doesn't want to be punished by the EU for that. And how to avoid punishment, like cutting of funds. He can say, OK, you want to cut my funds, I will not vote for the decisions which are so vital for you. And this opens a huge territory for negotiations, for blackmailing. And he masters this politics and is running this politics since years. He did with the Finland and Sweden accession with the NATO. He did it also with the negotiations on the future EU membership of Ukraine. He does it every time.
Yes, Mr. Sumlenny, based on what you're saying, it seems like Hungary is looking, rather Viktor Orban is looking for a trade-off of sorts. Now, Hungary has registered its own issues with the matter, but in practical sense, how do you expect a bloc of 27 countries to be on board with funding Ukraine for as long as it's needed?
Well, that is a huge dilemma. As we know, the EU must vote unanimously, like every country must vote for it, but it's not a problem. The problem is that the EU suddenly realizes that it can stay alone in its support for Ukraine with the United States falling off. Like we are experiencing since a couple of months a stalemate in the US Congress. And with the increase of influence of Donald Trump, who is not an elected president yet, and he's not even a candidate of the Republican Party yet, but he has already so much influence on the Republican congressmen and congresswomen that he can practically dictate them how to block the legislation. So in this situation, the European Union, which is not a military power, suddenly realizes that the military support of Ukraine is not a US prerogative anymore, but is a case of the EU. And it is in addition to financial support and economic support. So the role of the EU is growing. but the stakes are growing too, because if the Russian war against Ukraine escalates and Ukraine is being left without support, this is the war on the border of the European Union, and it will spill over. So the stakes are very high and the responsibility is high.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the fighting in a bit. Since you mentioned Donald J. Trump, I want to talk to you about this. In case Donald Trump is elected as the president of the United States this November, how do you expect that to have an impact in terms of the funding that's going to Ukraine?
Donald Trump is a person he can literally do everything. If he will be elected, I'm afraid his second term, this next term, will be more reckless than the first one. During the first term, he was not that experienced yet with the presidency. He was also surrounded by advisors. Some of them had a long history of being experienced advisors with a lot of expertise. They tried to balance his emotional movement. Now he will be most probably surrounded by quite other people who worship him as a man of God who has been sent to the earth by the providence. And also, like, we know that Donald Trump is the person who wants to make loud statements, America first, we need to save our money. He already threatened to cut NATO spending and maybe leave NATO. And of course, every time when he can make a statement, look, I don't want to give American money to the country like Ukraine or any other country. I preserve this American money for the Americans. He will do it because he knows that resonates a lot with his core audience, with his core supporters. He says, like, we keep American money in America. That's why he maybe will try not to give a penny to Ukraine.
All right, you make an interesting point there. Mr. Sumlenny, let's talk about Ukraine's position right now. Its counteroffensive did not pan out the way it wanted. Corruption charges have become common among its defense officials, and funding clearly is not at par with what it needs at the moment. So keeping these things in mind, how do you expect the war to progress in the months to come?
Well, I need to say that the Ukrainian army does amazing work compared to what volume of equipment and ammunition has been provided to Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't get any ammunition from the US since months. The deliveries from Europe are much lower than promised. The Ukraine hasn't got like any modern jets. The number of modern battle tanks is like about 50, 60 tanks they have received from all the nations when we talk about modern Western tanks. Still, the Ukrainians block the Russians. The Russians have not achieved any progress, and the Ukrainians continue to destroy, to decimate the Russian army. That is amazing. Regarding corruption, well, we know that there is a lot of talk about corruption in Ukraine, but that is the reason that Ukraine really is on fighting corruption, and they really uncover the cases of corruption. That's why we're talking about them, because the Ukrainian authorities arrest these people. And we know that, for example, the Americans, they have proven that all the equipment they have provided to Ukraine, their development is well documented. The Ukrainians have lost less equipment than the United Army loses equipment in routine operations overseas. So it's not that bad. But of course, we clearly are observing a stalemate now on the battlefield, which is caused once again by the lack of ammunition and equipment. The moment we provide Ukraine with enough ammunition and equipment, they demonstrate amazing success, like the Kharkiv offensive or Kherson offensive. So that's a very simple equation. We give an army ammunition and tanks, they win. We don't give an army ammunition, tanks, jets, they don't win. That's so simple. It's not about Ukraine, it's about the basic arithmetics of the war.
All right, Mr. Sumlenny, thank you so much for getting us all those insights from Berlin.
Thank you so much.